you. And you're so beaten down these days, seems there's nothing you can do. Well, as soon as the sun will shine again, well, then I just expect for more. The end of your cheek is in the streets, get up and out the door. Well, the policies of the rich are as hollow as they come. Well, the tallest corporations have just the sun to run. These streets that flow with pain. So the people of the power, we must take it back again. Raise your voice up. Raise your voice up. Raise your voice up. Raise your voice up. When the soul inside you is shaking, you know what to do. It's time to fight for justice. Tell the liars that they're through. Well, the world don't seem so bad no more when you look at it like that. Cause the people have the power, and we must take it back. For we're just hooked to the feeling. Now we can work for change. To make this world a better place. It isn't all the same. We have you among us with your heads held high. To the streets and to the road. We're standing as a crowd. Raise your voice up. Raise your voice up. Raise your voice up. Raise your voice up.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fighting Bob Fest 2023. My name is Norman Stockwell, publisher of the Progressive magazine, which was started 114 years ago by Robert M. La Follette, Fighting Bob. This is the bust of Fighting Bob La Follette here in the Wisconsin State Capitol, and the commemorative plaque that was just installed in January of this year by Secretary of State Doug La Follette. Writing in his 1912 autobiography, Bob La Follette says he learned during his years in the House of Representatives that the real question was, shall government be for the benefit of private interests, or shall government be for the benefit of public interest? This is the simple question involved in the present conflict in our nation, he wrote. 114 years ago, in January of 1909, La Follette, together with his wife, women's and civil rights activist Belle Case La Follette, launched a new national political magazine, La Follette's Weekly, to call out abuses of power and give voice to the struggles and victories of everyday people. La Follette proudly proclaimed on the banner of this magazine, today called The Progressive, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." As governor and then U.S. Senator, La Follette sought to represent the interests of the people and oppose the consolidation of power of the large corporations, especially railroads and other monopolies and trusts. He fought for the rights of workers to organize unions, for the preservation of the environment, and to regulate lobbyists and patronage politics. It is part of La Follette's legacy that today we have open political primaries, the direct election of senators through the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and thanks to his son, Robert M. La Follette, Jr., the right to hold recall elections when our officials are not fulfilling their duties. In the Senate, La Follette loudly opposed the entry of the United States into World War I, seeing it as a war for the wealthy that would be fought by everyday working people. In an April 1917 speech on the floor of the Senate, he spoke out for the poor, who are always the ones called upon to rot in the trenches. For his opposition to the war, La Follette was vilified in the press, burned in effigy on the UW campus, branded by many as a traitor, and threatened with expulsion from the U.S. Senate. But a century later, history has proven that his stance against the war and his analysis of its causes were absolutely correct. As Fighting Bob said when he was elected overwhelmingly to the U.S. Senate for a second term in 1911, tyranny and oppression are just as possible under democratic forms as any other. We are slow to realize that democracy is a life and involves continual struggle. It is only as those of every generation who love democracy resist with all their might the encroachments of its enemies that the ideals of representative government can even nearly be approximated. This year at Fighting Bob Fest, we celebrate that struggle of democracy as a life, and we want to bring to you these words, speeches, and comments from a number of people and several musicians on that theme today. Welcome to Fighting Bob Fest 2023.
Hi everyone, Tammy Baldwin here. While I wish I could be there with you in person this year, I'm excited to help kick off the 22nd annual Fighting Bob Fest. Thank you to The Progressive for not only putting on this incredible event year after year, but also for your continued commitment to honoring Wisconsin's progressive tradition. Fighting Bob had a vision for what our state and our country could be when the government worked for everyday people as opposed to the monopolies and the large corporate interests. And today, I have the privilege of holding the very same U.S. Senate seat that Fighting Bob La Follette Sr. once held. While Robert La Follette Sr. was taking on the railroads and other powerful monopolies over a century ago, his fight is just as relevant now. Today, I'm proud to be taking on the big multinational corporations and special interest groups of our time. They have way too much power and influence in Washington, and that's just wrong. But when we take on these fights together, we win. Just last year, we took on the drug industry and won. We beat Big Pharma, passing a law to lower prescription drug prices and cap out-of-pocket insulin costs at no more than $35 a month for our seniors. Right now, I'm working hard to pass another measure that will crack down on pharmaceutical bosses who try to hike up their prices without telling us why. Together, inspired by Fighting Bob himself, we are taking on powerful corporations and special interest groups to do right by working Wisconsinites. We can lower costs for our families. We can raise wages for our workers, and we can ensure that everyone is safe in their communities. And I promise you this, I will continue to fight for progressive values, the middle class, and the hardworking people of Wisconsin. And I thank you all for fighting alongside me. Enjoy the rest of Fighting Bob Fest, and I hope to see all of you next year.
It's an honor to be here with all of you to kick off Fighting Bob Fest, a gathering that honors the implacable fighting spirit of Fighting Bob La Follette and the progressive movement that he was a part of. Through their relentless organizing, they set a national example for progressive state reforms that advanced political democracy, the rights of working people, environmental protections, and social equality over corrupt politicians and the wealthy few. This gathering of the modern progressive movement comes at an important crossroads for the future of humanity and social progress. Wisconsin is a battleground state in 2024, and yet again at the national front lines in the struggle against a violent and authoritarian white supremacist movement that wants to hold and gain political power. Unprecedented attacks on voting rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, historic economic inequalities, a global climate crisis, and a humanitarian refugee crisis that is a product of global inequality. During the GOP debate, candidates vying for Trump supporters like Florida's DeSantis threatened to, quote, shoot people across the border and use military force in Mexico. DeSantis recently passed the worst anti-immigrant bill in the country that includes charging anyone, including a family member, friend, teacher, or faith leader, with a felony if they drive someone who is undocumented across state lines into Florida. This is coming from a man that used state public dollars to trick and send in buses of refugees to other states as a mere political stunt. But he is not alone in the hatred he is provoking that is resulting in a continued increase in hate crimes. And it is not just the threat of the far-right MAGA movement, but a larger political system that is unresponsive to the needs of millions of people. I'm here tonight to share with you the work that we're doing in Wisconsin to organize Latinos and youth statewide as part of a larger progressive movement to advance justice in Wisconsin and prevail over the forces of hate, greed, and division. For those who are unfamiliar with our work, Latino immigrants and youth in Wisconsin have played a critical role in the fight for democracy and against right-wing xenophobia and racism, organizing some of the largest marches and strikes in the state's history, known as the Day Without Latinx and Immigrants, to beat back state and local anti-sanctuary bills, as well as building the largest Latinx and multiracial youth voter network in Wisconsin, which we dubbed Voceros por el Voto. This voter network, knitted together by our members and people they know, has organized a critical margin of new and infrequent voters that defeated former Governor Walker in 2018, defeated Trump in 2020, and helped elect pro-immigrant governor in 2022 once again, and then most recently helped elect Judge Janet Protasiewicz to the state Supreme Court. Key to motivating our base this year was the hope for a progressive majority on the court that would finally dismantle the most gerrymandered maps in the nation that undermines the will of the people, and with fair maps and fair elections, open a path to restoring state driver's licenses for immigrants, tuition equity, and abortion rights in Wisconsin. In a swing state where elections are decided with less than 1% of the vote, Latinx represent the largest and growing demographic voting base. In 2020 alone, 18,000 Latinos turned 18 and were eligible to vote for the first time. 11,000 of them were the children of immigrants. In 2020, over 70% of Latinx in Wisconsin voted for Biden over Trump. This year, our statewide relational voter network, Voceros por el Voto, has grown to 35,000 voters strong, many of them new and infrequent voters. They have been at the forefront of defeating the threat of MAGA candidates that target our families and community. In addition to organizing political power, Voces also believes that a key strategy to building more power in Wisconsin is to prioritize worker organizing and leadership development through workplace rights trainings and organizing skills, and integrating this work with the newly won Deferred Action for Labor Enforcement, DALE, for undocumented workers. In January of this year, because of movement pressure, the Department of Labor announced the creation of DALE so that immigrant workers who file labor complaints or are fearful of speaking out during an investigation are eligible for temporary protected status from deportation and can secure a 2-year work permit, a social security number, and access to a state driver's license. To date, with the help of staff and volunteers, we've helped 83 workers in Brown County be screened and apply for DALE and integrated them into the Essential Worker Rights Network. Our plans are to expand this program statewide as a way to improve the lives of working people and their families by conquering fear, building unity, and having workers assert their labor rights. Deferred Action for Undocumented Workers represents a watershed opportunity to advance the struggle for immigrant rights, worker rights, and the larger struggle for democracy. Immigration status creates a chilling effect for people to organize on the job and makes it easy to retaliate against workers. This new protection not only addresses this issue, but benefits from what is usually a long, drawn-out labor rights struggle by helping workers apply and be part of a sustained worker struggle with a sustained protection. This victory of the movement could not have come at a better time, as under Trump and Biden, there was an expansion of 287G programs and federal contracts that expand information sharing between ICE and local law enforcement. In Wisconsin, there are now 7 counties with 287G and 30 counties that have federal information sharing contracts. This growth has happened under the radar screen, out of public view. In the lead up to the national elections, Voces, as part of a national coalition, the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, or FIRM, is calling on President Biden to end the controversial 287G program and expand temporary protections through executive action. Voces is also seeking citizenship services and legal and labor rights support for asylum seekers statewide. The current refugee humanitarian crisis is resulting in more undocumented workers that are a growing part of the labor force and are being taken advantage of. We have been helping to coordinate humanitarian aid with others and building legal and volunteer capacity to help asylum seekers apply with the U.S. government in their first year so that they may access a work visa, social security number, and driver's license. Though we need to add a lot more pressure on the Biden administration to expedite this process. We're also always ready to challenge and call out dangerous policies and narrative that dehumanizes people and contributes to xenophobia, racism, deportations, and human rights abuses. The immigrant rights movement is resilient, militant, and powerful. Out of each anti-sanctuary state and local backlash, whether California's Proposition 187, Arizona's Show Me Your Papers law, or Trump's election in 2016, our community has built organizations, resistance, and solidarity to beat back these attacks. From Know Your Rights trainings, legal challenges, get out the vote efforts, boycotts, civil disobedience, protests, marches, and strikes. In Wisconsin, Voces has used the power of the community-wide general strike, known as the Day Without Latinx and Immigrants, to defeat a state anti-sanctuary bill in 2017 and the imposition of 287G in Milwaukee by former Sheriff Clark right after the administration came into power, the Trump administration. To advance the struggle, we must continue to build community and coalitions like the Coalition for Safe Roads to restore driver's licenses and unite to publicly stand up against Republican strategies to hold power by delaying a court decision by a democratically elected judge to end gerrymandering. Today, we renew our pledge to ourselves and to each other to continue in the struggle on all fronts. Si se puede on Wisconsin.
Hi, this is Jessica Becker from Wisconsin Humanities. I'm excited to introduce you all to the second season of our podcast called Human Powered, Humanity Unlocked. This second season of the podcast is specifically an opportunity to hear from people who have been impacted by Wisconsin's justice system, people who have been or are incarcerated, people who are working in those populations and have really seen the impact that humanities can have. That is things like poetry, creative writing, the arts, journalism. And so we're sharing stories from people, and this is really for anyone who wants a perspective on the justice system that's more human and authentic than what you might see on TV or in the movies. This is for anybody who's concerned about mass incarceration in Wisconsin, anyone who's wondering if there's ways that interesting, creative, and inspiring things are really changing people's lives in prisons, and wants to hear some of those good stories. So we know that readers of The Progressive will be really inspired by Human Powered, and have probably read plenty of stories in the magazine about or from people who are incarcerated. So we think this is a really something you'll enjoy. You can find episode extras, so lots of behind the scenes things that are related to the topic and the people who are featured in the episodes on our website, wisconsinhumanities.org/podcast. We're going to share now the trailer, and you can find the podcast anywhere you find podcasts, any listening app, YouTube, or again on our website.
Human Powered, the podcast from Wisconsin Humanities, is coming back for season 2.
And this time, we're exploring the importance the humanities can have for people impacted by the justice system.
Guys would ask me, T, how did you do 38 years, man, and not lose your mind? And I said, well, first of all, man, my body's locked up. My mind is not locked up.
I'm Dasha Kelly Hamilton, Wisconsin Poet Laureate and Creative Change Agent. I've led poetry workshops in and out of prisons for years.
And I'm Adam Carr, public historian and journalist. The number of incarcerated Wisconsinites has grown dramatically in the last 40 years, and notably, our state imprisons Black men at a higher rate than any other state in America.
And what Adam and I have seen time and time again is that the humanities give people the tools to search for meaning and understanding through poetry, storytelling, journalism, and history. That can start with recognizing the shared humanity of people around you.
Inmates spend so much time putting on a front, getting into character because they feel this is what they need to do to get through a day, that they never tell somebody like, man, I'm hurting, or this is what I gone through as a kid. When you learn that about a person, you even greet them differently, like, how you feeling today, instead of, what's up?
And the humanities can connect people to the larger social and cultural issues around imprisonment.
I couldn't put the context of the human experience and the relationship to carcerality in the same way without the humanities. The humanities do something special to help us better understand the human condition. And if we need anything in this conversation around prisons, is a better understanding of the human condition.
And they can help all of us reflect on how we might think differently about people who are or have been incarcerated.
I believe every human being is so much more than the sum total of the things that have happened to them and what they've done. And so how do we invite people if we're always talking about what's wrong with you or what you did or how this happened? We do have to look at that, but it's different to look at it with a lens of exploring the possibilities, exploring the dreams and hopes you might still have.
Seeing the humanities in action in places that can be truly dehumanizing is a powerful reminder of the importance of the humanities everywhere, every day.
Our new season will come out in early 2023, but you can find Human Powered Season 1 right now on your favorite podcast app.
Hit subscribe, and you'll be the first to know when the new episodes are here. We can't wait to share them with you.
Hello, I'm Deborah Lofgren.
And we are the Raging Grannies of Madison, Wisconsin. We are the raging grannies. We don't hide in nooks and crannies. We stand up for peace and justice, even when the police bust us. Join with the raging grannies. Time to get up off your fannies. The world needs folks to take a stand, and that's why we are grands. Follow the money to see why we go off to war. Follow the money, it's not freedom we're fighting for. Follow the money, profits aren't worth dying for. Lockheed Martin's got their billions, and they don't need more. Boeing and Raytheon, Bechtel and Koch brothers too. Reap all the profits and don't give a fig about you. Families are hungry, schools don't have funds that they need. Weapon makers turn a blind eye while the country bleeds. Follow the money, it all leads to corporate greed. The vets and the homeless, when will they get what they need? Big money interests dictate our nation's war plans. Now's the time to take back our country and give folks a helping hand. People, not profits, let's make our government see. War steals our treasure, killing cannot make us free. Follow the money, and once you have found where it leads, raise your voice, get loud and louder, singing out for peace.
September surrounds us as we walk alone, trying to remember. The year is turning like the leaves, the battles she once fought in are fading like sweet summer days, like her, almost forgotten. May we all honor in our work the heroes of our history. May they return to bring us hope from roots sunk deep in memory. May old acquaintance be renewed, may no ill wind forestall it, and may we always keep the faith of Belle LaFollette. No street, no highway bears her name, no statue shows her strong and proud. No building tall is named for her, such silence where she spoke so loud. No mural of the fierce campaigns she proudly cast her lot in. The present overwhelms the past until it's near forgotten. May we all honor in our work the heroes of our history. May they return to bring us hope from roots sunk deep in memory. May old acquaintance be renewed, may no ill wind forestall it, the faith of Belle LaFollette. There are those who hide at home, waiting for the storm to pass, while others find security in fighting hard and standing fast. From racial justice to world peace, from suffrage to the picket line, Belle led the struggles of her day with vision far beyond her time. May we all honor in our work the heroes of our history. May they return to bring us hope from roots sung deep in memory. May all acquaintance be renewed. May no ill wind befall it. And may we always keep the faith of Belle LaFollette.
Hi there, I'm Ruth Conniff. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Wisconsin Examiner and editor-at-large for the Progressive magazine, and welcome to Fighting Bob Fest. We are at Fighting Bob Fest 2023, rolling into the 2024 presidential election. And here in Wisconsin, we're at the center of the attacks on democracy that are so important to pay attention to this year. A lot of the regular national media has been covering the presidential election in 2024 as if it were a normal presidential election. It's not. Donald Trump is the runaway favorite to get the nomination here in Wisconsin at the Milwaukee Republican Convention as a convicted felon, potentially. And the movement that has coalesced behind him has making no secret that it's attacking the right to vote, and it's trying to undermine basic democratic institutions. The Wisconsin Examiner has been covering the Republican majority in the Wisconsin legislature's threats to impeach our newly elected Supreme Court justice, who's leading a new liberal majority in the Wisconsin Supreme Court that's taking up a case on gerrymandering. Wisconsin has one of the most politically gerrymandered maps in the country, and that's why Republicans have been able to hang on to this hugely disproportionate majority in the legislature. So after losing an election, and then the voters of Wisconsin voting by a very large margin to elect somebody who opposes gerrymandering and opposes the state's draconian 19th century abortion ban, the Republicans in the legislature are now, instead of fighting it out at the ballot box, they're trying to remove her from office so they can hang on to minority rule. And this is just one example of the kinds of attacks on democracy post-Donald Trump that we see all over the country. Wisconsin Examiner is one of 30 outlets around the country run by States Newsroom, a nonprofit that's covering state news at state capitals and trying to bring people the news about these efforts. So it's a really important time to pay attention to state news. You can follow us at WisconsinExaminer.com for free. You can look at other states' newsroom outlets around the country and states everywhere. Keep reading the Progressive magazine, and let's band together to defend democracy. Fighting Bob LaFollette called democracy a life, and it has never needed a broad coalition of the public to come together and continue to fight to keep it alive than it does right now. Thanks.
Good evening. This is Greg Palast, and as you can tell from my hat, I'm an investigative reporter, proud to be back once again with the Fighting Bob Fest, and now we are virtual. So I'll accept your standing ovations as dots in the air. I want to thank Norm Stockwell, the publisher of the Progressive and the whole Progressive team, for having me back, because we have a lot to discuss. 2 films I'm working on. Many of you know me, Greg Palast, you've seen me in the page of the Progressive. You've seen me on Democracy Now!, BBC, and the pages of The Guardian, where I was an investigative reporter. Now I'm working on 2 films, 2 investigations, which are vitally important. And the first one, we're going to show you a trailer in a minute. In October 20, the film Killers of the Flower Moon will be released, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and directed by Martin Scorsese. This is the story of the Osage and what happened to them in the 1920s. These were the richest people on this planet. They discovered oil, and then the US government got a bunch of white guys and oil companies who simply killed them for their oil. It's a story that's important for us to know and important to the Osage, but the Osages have asked me and DiCaprio to do something important. They didn't die. They didn't disappear. Many died, but they didn't disappear as a people 100 years ago. This is the film, the documentary I'm making about what's happened to them in the 100 years since. And it's their story. And it's very much our story too. So here's Long Knife, the trailer of the film, which will be releasing in coordination with the Scorsese film Killers of the Flower Moon.
Hawe dahi nikshe. Nikapaki zonzoli wajaji. Ali Wakanda Kistomiha. They couldn't kill all of us.
Charles Koch said when one of his executives asked him, who was wired, "You're already a billionaire, why are you stealing a few dollars a week from poor Indians?" And Koch said, "Because I want my fair share." And that's all of it.
He stated that he didn't want to pay a royalty to us, that we didn't deserve it.
They would be drinking, and they said, "I don't know why anyone robs banks when you could drill for oil on Indian lands." Wow.
2.4 billion.
But it's not over. It's still happening.
I always say the white man's got big medicine. He can do bad things and get away with it.
What you just saw was the trailer to the film Long Knife, which we'll be putting out at the beginning of next year in coordination with Killers of the Flower Moon, the film starring Leonardo DiCaprio and directed by Martin Scorsese. It's not by accident that we are doing this. This is a film about what happened to the Osage Nation. In 1897, the biggest oil find in America was discovered on the Osage Reservation. And immediately, so that immediately made the Osage the richest people on this planet. But when you're sitting on top of oil, when natives are sitting on top of oil, believe me, they're not going to hold on to it very long. So what happened was that they were assigned guardians by the US government. Every Osage was assigned a white guardian because obviously as native peoples, they were incompetent. They were like children who couldn't handle their wealth or money. So they had these guardians to protect their wealth. The way they protected their wealth was to create documents in which the guardians were the beneficiaries in case of the death of their wards, and they systematically then proceeded to kill their wards. Bullets to the back of the head. Sometimes one of the ringleaders of the killings, one of the guardians who became fabulously wealthy, a guy named William Hale, he liked to marry Osage women and then shoot them or poison them, strychnine, cyanide, and just to make a point for those who resisted turning over their wealth to the white so-called guardians, they dynamited the home of one of the Osage to take out a couple family members. Now, that's the film Killers of the Flower Moon. And that ends really in the 20s when the end of the period when the Osage lost almost all of their oil wealth to these killers, blessed in effect by the US government, empowered by the US government. But what's happened since? These people haven't disappeared. They still had some wealth. And once again, whatever oil wealth was left to them, someone was going to take. And the taker was a guy named Charlie Koch, because the Osage were left with just a little bit of oil, these stripper wells that may produce 2 barrels a week, 2 barrels a month. It wasn't worth piping. So this little company out of Wichita called Koch Oil said, well, we'll pick up all your oil in trucks and we'll sell it and we'll send you a check. And that was authorized by the US government, the BIA. The Osage had very little to do with it. But what happened is that Charlie Koch sent out his trucks and personally, I want to emphasize this, personally ordered them to steal the oil from the natives. In other words, no one's around. You have to go out to these reservations. You'll see these oil pumps in the middle of nowhere, these filthy old oil pumps. Koch would a truck would pick up 50 barrels of oil and write down, leave a little note in a jar. Oh, we took 40 barrels of oil. Massively stealing oil, well over $1 billion and up to maybe $2.4 billion worth of oil stolen from the Osage by Koch Industries. And also you and me, the US government, the US taxpayers, because a lot of those royalties were supposed to be divided with the US government. So this may sound like nothing new, just another case of white guys ripping off Indians for their resources. But it's more important for us than that. One, it's important to the Osage for you to know that the mayhem and the poisonings continued, but they continued in a different way. They didn't just shoot people. Koch Oil didn't shoot people in the back of their heads for their royalties. They simply stole it off their properties. But even more important, they also, by the way, poisoned the native land. So they were burying oil sludge on native property. They're still being poisoned today by it. In fact, despite the fact that on the reservation at the Osage in Oklahoma, you've seen alcoholism and drug use, which are, the bane of white America right now, is nearly disappearing off the reservation. Nevertheless, their life expectancy has declined by about 3 years. Why? Because of the fracking and oil pollution mayhem. And we have to be concerned about this too, because this was the early giant monster oil field of America. It's what powered our entire military during World War I and much of World War II. And we have over 10,000 abandoned wells on the Osage Reservation. 10,000. Now, those things are a half century to a century old, and they're spewing methane into the air. This is where the biggest oil fortunes in America were born. Remember, we didn't have an oil industry. This is the origin. The Osage oil is what made Getty rich. It's what made Phillips Petroleum, Frank Phillips. This is where his fortune began, Phillips 66, which is now ConocoPhillips. This is Sinclair Oil, ExxonMobil. These are the companies that actually started right here with Osage oil. The Osage were not allowed to develop their own oil fields. They wanted to, but again, they were considered incompetent. Now, you say, oh, that's the bad old days. That's like Jim Crow. No, it ain't like Jim Crow, because there's a difference. The Osage are still considered by the United States government as mentally incompetent, like children unable to handle their own affairs. Now, understand that the chief of the Osage, the principal chief, Jeffrey Standing Bear, is one of the top trial lawyers of America. But this isn't something new. When the Osage did have their moment of wealth, notably, while there were stories about, oh, they put them into motor cars and furs, they put a lot of it into education. And so they ended up with the great best-selling author Luther Standing Bear in the 1920s and 30s, and great film actor. We had a vice president of the United States who was an Osage, Vice President Curtis in the 1930s. We had, and of course, America's two prima ballerinas, Maria and Marjorie Tall Chief, were the daughters of the Tall Chief of the Osage. An interesting little fact is that the Osage are the tallest people in the world. So they're still considered wards of the US government. And their fate, they cannot plug those wells. They cannot stop people from stealing their oil because they are under the control, the occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Land Management, and the U.S. government. So the Trail of Tears is not ended. It's just changed form. Those 10,000 wells are belching methane into the atmosphere. It's one of the great methane plumes, which is punching a hole in our ozone. And again, we come back to who are the principal perps? KOCH, directed by Charlie Koch. This is the origin. Remember, Koch oil was nothing. They were just a bunch of oil rustlers out of Wichita. This is where their fortune came from and their political machine. And this is why this is important too, which you'll find in the film Long Knife. And if you want more information on the film, go to gregpalast.com to find out when it will be released and how you can get the information on the film. Produced by George DiCaprio and directed by the great David Ambrose. And of course, you'll see me reporting and investigating. I started this investigation, by the way, almost 3 decades ago when I was asked to investigate these guys, the Koch brothers, the richest guys no one had ever heard of. I couldn't get any, by the way, I couldn't get a news outlet in the least interested in these guys you've never heard of from Wichita. And so this is the real story of the Kochs and the real danger. And of course, it ends with their whole climate denial sabotage campaign. And so the Osage struggle is our struggle. And that's why we're making this film Long Knife. So go to gregpalast.com for more info. Now, at the same time, I'm remaking a film that has yet to be commercially released called Vigilante. It is called Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman. And here's 90 seconds from Vigilante.
Right now, I'm the chairman of the Columbus-Muskogee Republican Party, so I'm pretty involved in that, which I think is the right. Let's see, that would be the right way to be, and also I'm on the right.
Apparently, you had filed some challenges to 4,000 voters.
Yes.
No ballot. No ballot in the mail. Called to register, and the announcement there was, Mr. Turner, you have been challenged.
Major Gamaliel Turner is the military's expert on warfare of the future.
I project weapons and capabilities out to the future. You know, for me, it's all about the survival of the soldier.
Assigned to Port Hueneme in California.
So you're telling me 2,600 miles away, 2 days or 3 days before an election, that if I want to vote, all I have to do is show up and prove as an American citizen that I have the right to vote again? You talk to fools like that. You talk to fools like that. I'm not a fool.
So what you just saw is a vigilante who challenged the vote of Major Gamaliel Turner. Why did he challenge Gamaliel Turner's vote? Because he was assigned by the President of the United States to Fort Hueneme in California. Because as one of the nation's top experts on warfare of the future. So when the president assigns you to a military base, but your home is in Georgia, you're not supposed to lose your vote, but apparently if you are African American. So what's happened is that Georgia created a law, SB 202, and I know Brian Kemp, the governor, the Republican governor, and his Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, have been played as heroes, supposedly guys who stood up to Donald Trump. Well, that's an internal right-wing fight. But Brian Kemp, Governor Brian Kemp, and his henchman, the Secretary of State, are the worst, most vicious racist vote suppressors. And I don't say that lightly, since Katherine Harris. In fact, I would say Brian Kemp makes Katherine Harris look like Thomas Jefferson in high heels. They passed a law, SB 202 in Georgia, which was nearly 100 pages of vicious attacks on the right to vote. And in particular, they allowed something which has never been allowed before, or hadn't been allowed since the days of the Ku Klux Klan. And that is the right of any citizen to challenge the right of any other citizen to have their vote counted. And just so you know, how many people were challenged? The answer is 88 Republican operatives challenged 250,000 voters, overwhelmingly voters of color, Black, Hispanic, Asian, in other words, the color blue. Now, I'm not being partisan about this. There wasn't a single challenge, not one voter challenged in Georgia by a Democrat, but 250,000 by Republicans. And so what we did, what you saw in that clip, is that one of these vigilantes, Alton Russell, as he says, he's vice chairman of the state party in Georgia. He is a leader of the Georgia Republican Party, close friend of Brian Kemp's. He personally challenged 4,000 voters, all in the Fort Benning area. That meant that he was challenging, like Major Turner, Black soldiers' right to vote just because they were assigned by the military outside of their Georgia home. And he, as you see, he dresses up like a vigilante with the 6 guns. He dresses up as if he's Doc Holliday. So he literally dresses up as a vigilante. Now, you might think it's funny. By the way, this guy was armed. It may have been an old, it was a 45, brand new 45 replica, and he made a big point that it was loaded. So we were a bit nervous. And what he didn't know is that he had challenged 4,000 voters. And we asked him, did you speak to any of these voters? No. Did you go to their homes and make sure that they were actually had moved out of those homes? No. Did you call any of them? No. By the way, do you know where you are? No. You're in the home of Major Gamaliel Turner, the home you said he doesn't live in here in Decatur, Georgia. He challenged these 4,000 voters without any information. And also in the film, you'll see me confront another one of the vigilantes, again, a Georgia Republican Party official. And this woman had personally challenged over 32,000 voters. And I said, did you actually contact 32,000 voters to see if they were legitimate voters? She says, how can I call 32,000 people? I said, well, but you had no problem challenging their right to vote. The only reason why Reverend Warnock was reelected was because we were able to basically virtually eliminate every challenge but 500 out of 250,000. The only reason Joe Biden won that state is we were able to fight the vote suppression techniques in Georgia. Now, it's not whether I'm for or against Joe Biden or I'm for or against the Senator Reverend Warnock being elected or not being elected. That's not my job as a journalist. But one thing I am proud of is that we helped 250,000 people who otherwise would have never had their vote counted. They got their votes counted. And that means that we all count. So vote suppression is not just a problem of the people whose vote is suppressed. It cancels out your democracy. So I want you to go again to gregpalast.com to get more information about Vigilante, America's vote suppression hitman, which is introduced and produced by my favorite president, Martin Sheehan. Well, FDR may be a little bit better than Martin Sheehan, but we can have that debate. The important thing is that we keep our eyes open. And by the way, one thing we're going to have in Vigilante, for those watching this from Madison, Wisconsin, home of the great Progressive magazine, is that there's a section on Wisconsin too. Because where did some of these tricks come out of? They come out of Wisconsin right-wing institutes that are backed by the Bradley Family Foundation out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And you'll get to meet some of those characters as well. So what you may say this film is based is, while it's centered in Georgia, Georgia is America. The GOP test drives all of their vote suppression tactics in Georgia first, because it's a key swing state. And when that works, it spreads to Arizona, to Texas, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and beyond. And that's what you'll see in the new version of the film, Vigilante, coming out next year. In the meantime, go to gregpalast.com, sign up for our continuing reports so you know about the work we're doing with the Osage, and you'll know about the work we're doing on vote suppression. And I really thank you, Norman, for giving me this opportunity, and for the Fighting Bob people who are staying with us to continue the fight. Thank you.
And here we are at Fighting Bob Fest 2023, and joining us from the sweltering state of Texas is Jim Hightower, longtime Fighting Bob member and also a regular contributor to the Progressive magazine. Jim, welcome to Fighting Bob Fest 2023.
Great to be with you again, Norman. All the Bob Festers out there. I miss our gatherings in person, but maybe we can fix that in the short run.
Next year, we'll all be together in person again. Jim, you've been with Fighting Bob Fest since the beginning, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about its development, and also the 20th century Chautauquas that inspired this idea of Fighting Bob Fest.
Right. Well, of course, Fighting Bob Fest was initiated by a few strong activist leaders there in Wisconsin, basically meeting not in Madison, but in upstate, where they were fighting the water pirates coming into your state to try to profiteer off of local people's water, and of course led by Ed Garvey. One of the great fighters of all times. Ed, of course, was a battling Irishman. He had that Irish spirit. If there was a fist fight going on, he would walk over and say, "Is this a private fight, or can anybody join it?" He wanted to be a part of the battle, and he made some terrific battles over the years. So anyway, at one point, he decided that politics should not be just a bunch of meetings, and that was becoming a problem for Democratic Party politics. Was that it needed to have a little bit of that good spotted cow going for the people to sip on as they discuss politics. And then we needed to have some of those Wisconsin brats, and we needed to have some music, and it needed to be fun. And as Ed put it, we need to put the party back in politics. And so the good folks there in Madison and then elsewhere around the state came together to form Fighting Bob Fest. And it has just been a jewel over the years, a great model for what politics can and should be. Putting the spirit literally into it, and putting fun into it. You know, battling the bastards really is just about as much fun as you can have with your clothes on. But it helps if you have a little libation going, a little bit of music, and a little bit of spirit, and make it just an occasion, a festival of politics, indeed a sort of county fair of politics. And that's what Bob Fest became. First holding it up in Baraboo at the great county fairgrounds there. And then in Madison and around. It's been a great movement, and it's a model for the rest of the country. So I tout it everywhere that I go as something that people can and should do. And it's all done by volunteers there. And it's all put together, no charge, as Garvey used to say, at the festival itself. It's free to get in, but you do have to pay to get out. So they pass the hat, pass the bucket on a regular basis, and raised enough money each time to cover the cost.
Jim, you work with activists all around the country, chronicling their fights and their successes in your columns and in your podcasts. Tell us about the mood around the United States today. What issues are folks concerned about, and where do you see hope?
Well, the issues of concern are the obvious ones, starting with economics, inequality, and then moving on into all the issues of social and cultural inequality in our society. The moneyed powers are running roughshod over us. They're holding down the middle class. They're tearing down our economic and political rights. And they think they're the top dogs, and we're just a bunch of fire hydrants out here in the countryside. So there's a rebellion against that, and by rebellion I mean just the grassroots spirit. People want action, and that is has been part of the disappointment of people in the Democratic Party. The most common thing that pollsters and people who go door to door and canvassing and visiting with people, not just quickie surveys, but spending time on a front porch with somebody, 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, they find that the most common question comes down to, where the hell are the Democrats? Why are they not standing up for us? And we've had a party for too long that has been mired in Washington and mired in money, rather than grassroots politics. So they have given up, particularly on the rural areas in our country. And that has led to a defection from the Democratic Party, not from the values that Democrats are based on: economic fairness, social justice, equal opportunity for all people. That's what our party stands for. But too often around the country, we've gotten away from that and put too much of our emphasis on television ads for candidates, rather than going out into the countryside, being with the people on a regular basis, developing a relationship, and building a party. That's again, a part of that is putting the party back in politics, as Bob Fest does. That brings people together, and people hear more from musicians or hear a message stronger from culture than they do from political speeches or political ads and that sort of thing. And people yearn, I think, in our country for that spirit to come back in. My old friend Fred Harris, who ran for president back in the 1970s and has been a longtime pal of mine, former senator from Oklahoma. Fred said, you can't have a mass movement without the masses. Well, to have the masses, you've got to reach out to them. And to reach out to them, you've got to give them a reason to want to be a part of your party, either the capital P party or little p party. And that's what Bob Fest has done over the years, and that's where successful organizing is happening. And I would just say, you asked what gives me hope, and it is grassroots activism. Despite the too often the lack of national political action that is big, that people are looking for to produce real change, not incremental tinkering with the system, but actual change to stop the inequality in our society, has come from just regular folks. The environmental justice movement, for example, is doing more good in more places, far more people than all of the political and large environmental organizations combined. People are taking charge of their own community, their own environment, their water, their soil, et cetera. So the movement is there. And we've seen recently some big changes coming from labor. We just had Labor Day, so that's passed, but Labor's Day is just beginning. Because the important thing that's happening with labor, we see the big strikes taking place with the Teamsters and the actors and screenwriters. We see that now the UAW moving. But the significant thing about those movements is that it's not an organization that's doing it. It's not a particular leader that's doing it. It's the workers themselves, organized, that are on the move in this country and producing real change. So the UAW has panicked. The big three auto makers, the barons of auto making, because it's real change. They're not just saying, well, let's get together and see if we can get a little bit of coming our way. We're not begging anymore. People are in their face. Shawn Fain, who is the new president of the UAW, elected, by the way, directly by the membership. An uncommon thing, believe it or not, among unions is to have a real mass democracy in it, and it did exist in this last union election that Shawn Fain won as president, and that has now energized that union to go right in the face of the corporate arrogance and greed, really. For example, the first proposal that the automakers, auto barons, put on the table, Shawn Fain literally picked it up and threw it in a wastebasket and said that's where it belongs. That stunned the gentleman of the and gentle lady of the auto leadership. And then, of course, they retaliated by saying, well, the workers' demands are just excessive. Excessive. The big three automakers, their CEOs make between $20 and $34 million a year each. So I don't think they have any room to be talking about excess, but it's that disparity that has rallied people at the countryside, and it gives people some hope when the UAW, for example, and the Teamsters and flight attendants and others that are on the move, when they rise up, they're rising up not because of their own leadership quality. They're rising up because the workers behind them are pushing them up, and that's big change.
You know, speaking of that kind of grassroots organizing, next year is the 100th anniversary of Fighting Bob La Follette's run for the presidency as an independent third-party progressive candidate. We're going to be doing a big conference about that next spring. But, you know, he got 1 out of every 6 votes around the country in that election in 1924. What are the lessons of that campaign and that type of organizing for our movements today? You've talked about it a little bit, but as we move into another presidential election year, what should we be looking for?
Well, I think the message is clear. If you stand up for the people might stand up for you. And even against great odds, because it's, you know, the powers that be have basically made third parties illegal in our country, or at the very least almost impossible to form and to maintain themselves. But the important thing about that movement that Fighting Bob pulled together in that particular presidential election is that there were elections preceding that. There were local elections, district elections, state elections, and as has happened in the populist movement, and then in the labor movement, the progressive movement of Bob La Follette, that's where you build. You don't start by running for president. That's a culmination of a movement, and you've got to take heart in the victories that you have at a local level, and then build on that. And too often, particularly our moneyed people within the progressive movement, want to focus on, you know, the sparklies. Who's running for president? Could I get them to come to my house or to my company and visit with people? Could I share some of the glory of some of the sparkle of a presidential run, rather than investing in that grassroots infrastructure that we have to have? And that's just one example is here in Texas. We've had great candidates, but we have no infrastructure at a grassroots level because the party, the moneyed people have put all their money into a particular candidate who's shiny at any particular moment of a year, but doesn't leave anything behind. So we've got 50 counties, for example, that have no Democratic Party chair, much less an active Democratic committee operating. So that's not a movement. That's really personality. And a movement cannot be based just on personality. It's got to be based on, well, a movement. You can't have a mass movement without the masses, and that takes a whole lot of organizing to be done. And that's what La Follette was all about, both in his writing and his formation of the Progressive magazine, in his formation of a party. And he was not the only one running on that ticket. And that's the kind of attitude we have to come back to, is that we build from the grassroots up, not from the top down.
Jim Hightower, thank you so much for joining us this year at Fighting Bob Fest 2023, joining us from the great state of Texas. And when I say great, I mean large and hot, but we're really pleased to have you with us and looking forward to having you back in person next year when we celebrate this 100th anniversary of progressive politics.
I can hardly wait. Thank you, Norm, and thanks to all of the Bob Festers. Keep at them.
It's an honor to join Fighting Bob Fest once more. I've been at every Fighting Bob Fest since the first one more than 20 years ago, and the festival has evolved, but the point has not. The point is to recall the legacy of Robert M. La Follette, the greatest Wisconsin governor and senator, and the great champion of economic and social and racial justice, of conservation, and of peace. Robert M. La Follette was a remarkable man, and in addition to being the founder of the Progressive magazine, which is one of the great sponsors of Fighting Bob Fest, as well as a great ally of the Capital Times, a newspaper with which I've been associated most of my adult life, La Follette was a great theorist on democracy. And his belief was that the will of the people should be the law of the land, that democracy should work. And we gather at a time when Wisconsin democracy is absolutely under assault. In April of this year, voters in Wisconsin chose a new Supreme Court Justice, Janet Protasiewicz. In August, she took office, and now, barely weeks into her term, before she's heard any major case, Justice Protasiewicz faces the prospect, not the certainty, but the prospect of impeachment by a state legislature that doesn't want her to deal with the issue of gerrymandering. It's all a complicated case, and one that most people who are tuning in are already well aware of. But I bring that up because this is something La Follette would have understood, both instinctually and practically. La Follette had to battle at the founding of the Progressive, and even before that, at the beginning of his journey into statewide politics, against political machines and against backroom political operatives who sought to diminish democracy by using every tool they had to make elections less meaningful and to make the power of economic and political elites greater. And we're seeing such a moment today. It's easy to be frustrated and to think that there are no victories, and that we keep sort of repeating everything as it's been up to this point, that there is kind of a Groundhog's Day scenario, that when progressives advance their cause, they get knocked back. Then they advance it again, they get knocked back. And there's some truth to that. But one thing that's important to understand is that there are moments in history where progressives have a transformational impact on the direction of the state of Wisconsin and of the country. And one of those moments came in 1924. And in the broad sense, Robert M. La Follette's campaign for the presidency that year was not successful, right? I mean, in the traditional way of measuring such things, he didn't get elected president of the United States. He only carried one state, Wisconsin. He got about 16% of the vote, which was incredible, one of the highest levels of votes ever for an independent progressive candidate, maybe the highest. And so they're nice measures, but he didn't win the election. And so there are those who might suggest that 1924 campaign was, a noble effort, but not one of tremendous meaning. They'd be wrong. The truth of the matter is that Robert M. La Follette's 1924 campaign transformed American politics. And I've obviously written about this a lot over the years, and I'm working on a book on it all now. But the thing to understand is this. When Robert M. La Follette ran for president in 1924, it was at a time when both the Republican and the Democratic parties were fully captured by Wall Street, and when they were entertaining and in fact engaging in relationships with the Ku Klux Klan. So here you had that combination of economic injustice and racial injustice taking shape and taking form within both major political parties. The Republicans nominated Calvin Coolidge that year, an absolute defender of the corporate order and very much a Republican insider. The Democrats nominated John Davis, a Wall Street lawyer, literally another corporate insider, and a lawyer who would eventually go on to fight in the U.S. Supreme Court to defend segregation. So both parties were on exactly the wrong track. And it was at that point that Robert M. La Follette, who had been a Republican most of his career, decided to leave the Republican fold and run as an independent progressive for the presidency of the United States. In that campaign, he built a coalition that would in many ways become the New Deal coalition of Franklin Roosevelt 8 years later, obviously extended and built up, but the basic concepts were there. La Follette brought together labor. He had the endorsement of the American Federation of Labor and the railroad unions and others. He brought in civil rights activists, W.B. Du Bois and members of the people with the NAACP were big supporters of La Follette's campaign. So too were women's rights activists. So too were all sorts of social justice activists from across the country, farm and labor people in states, not just Wisconsin, but across the upper Midwest. So it's a remarkable campaign that was brought together. And why did it come together? It came together in 1924 because La Follette was opposing that which was absolutely wrong with both political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And that was, again, their embrace of Wall Street, as well as their sympathy for the racist politics of the Ku Klux Klan and other forces that were very, very powerful at that point in not just the South, but the Northern U.S. But then there's another thing that was powerful there. Robert M. La Follette said in 1924, as did his supporters, that it was necessary to take on corporate power, that it was necessary to establish a new order in the United States where corporations were regulated, where monopolies were challenged, and where there was an understanding that some areas of economic life needed to be either regulated or actually guided by government. It was a very different take from that of many of his political predecessors. And the other thing about it that was really important was that La Follette believed that labor unions had to be incredibly strong. They had to be ready to take on corporate power, and they had to have the support of government, that unions had to, at the very least, have barriers taken down so that they could organize and collectively bargain. All of these things were central to the La Follette campaign. As I said, he didn't win in 1924, but 8 years later, in 1932, Robert M. La Follette's ideas became central to many of the ideas of Franklin Roosevelt's campaign that year and of what he did as the New Deal president of the United States. And many other legacies of the La Follette campaign continued into the 1950s, the 1960s, and beyond. Notably, Wisconsin Senator Russ Feingold, when he was reelected to the Senate in 1998, recalled the La Follette legacy and talked about the connections to all of that in his own tenure. Senator Bernie Sanders, when he's come to Fighting Bobfest in the past, has talked about that La Follette legacy and the importance of maintaining that connection. And so what we really recognize is that the La Follette campaign of 1924 was an incredible success because of its legacy, because of the message that it sent out, not just in his moment, but to generations that followed. And next year is the 100th anniversary of that 1924 campaign. The Progressive magazine, the Capital Times, and other institutions will be celebrating that legacy and remembering it. And we'll do it as part of this Fighting Bob Fest tradition. Fighting Bob Fest, founded by Ed Garvey and by folks from the Progressive and Cap Times, really is an effort to keep alive the legacy, not just in memory, not just saying, oh, these are historical things that occurred, but also to keep alive a legacy of fighting and campaigning and crusading for economic and social and racial justice, for saving the planet and for peace in our time. Those campaigns, those efforts, those crusades are as necessary as ever, as we see from what's going on, not just in Wisconsin, but nationally in the US. And 1924 was a beginning point. 2024 can be a pivot point, an absolutely vital pivot point for all of those struggles. So I'm honored to join Bob Fest this year as we talk about the legacy and we talk about the incredible role that the Progressive magazine and other institutions have played in maintaining that legacy, and where, frankly, we prepare for some incredible celebrations next year. We're going to remember a 100-year fight that isn't finished, but that will be won. Solidarity.
Thanks, everybody, for coming out to Fighting Bob Fest 2023. Thanks to all of our speakers and performers, and thanks to the Barrymore Theater, the Capital Times, and Brian Alberth of Left Effect Media. And thanks to all of you for watching tonight. Next year, 2024, is the 100th anniversary of Fighting Bob's run for the presidency of the United States as an independent progressive candidate. We'll be celebrating that with a conference and public events in April of 2024, so stay tuned for more information about that. And thank you all for supporting the Progressive Magazine, for subscribing, and for following us on the internet at progressive.org.